Namaste everybody, Hari Om, and बहुत बहुत आभार Ramji for giving me this platform to talk about the book, yes, but Mahabharat specifically. You actually Ramji has already said a lot of what I would have started talking about Mahabharata. Yeah? That yat iha asti na, so whatever you find here, you don't have anywhere else, and yat na iha asti na kutrachit. What is not here is not anywhere else. And why is that so? So, as Ramji said, right, with every generation, there is still interest in Mahabharata. There is so much written about Mahabharata. And it is not a recent phenomenon. You know, if you go to past, a lot of our Sanskrit playwrights, they have written about Mahabharata. Be it Bhattanarayan, who wrote Veni Samharam. We have Urubhangam. We have Abhigyan Shakuntalam. So much has been created based on themes picked out of Mahabharata in Natya Shastra, in plays, in general stories and folklore everywhere. So why does Mahabharata have such a central place for us? Yeah, I believe somewhere in all the characters of Mahabharata we see ourselves. They are also relatable. Yeah, we understand the dharma sankat that they are faced with. We understand कि भाई what इस situation में ये भी हो सकता है, ये भी हो सकता है, करे क्या? And everybody takes a position according to their own value system, according to what they think is the most important to them. Yeah. So this is why I think we relate to Mahabharata, because it's very real. But the reason I wrote this book, I mean, this was always there. Yeah, this understanding of Mahabharata was always there. But the reason this book came into being is because there were certain conversations happening, and I remember somebody mentioned that, "Arey, Mahabharata is great, of course, yeah," and everybody has an opinion of Mahabharata. आप किसी भी भारतीय को पकड़ोगे and you'll ask him about Mahabharata, everybody will know the overall story and they will have an opinion on it, irrespective of whether they have read the text or not. And now, not even disparaging those who have not read the text, because it's such a huge text. Yeah, 1000 सहस्त्र श्लोक, 1,00,000 श्लोक वाली काव्य पढ़ना is not easy and it's not for everybody. So it's very understandable. But everybody has a view on whatever they know of Mahabharata. Yeah? They have an opinion on every character. They have a view on किसको कैसा करना चाहिए. All that is always there. So we were having some conversation, some the usual random Facebook chit chat, and somebody mentioned, yeah, all this is fine, but we have to keep this in mind that Mahabharata is not really about India. It is about North India. Yeah. So this is a comment somebody made, and I'm like, sorry, why would you say that? And they're like, South has no role to play in it. It is all only about the North, the Aryan North. And I was like, but that is not really true. This probably doesn't come out in B.R. Chopra Mahabharata, because that is not the aim of that serial. The aim of the TV series was to bring us the story. So if it doesn't come out in that, and if it is not so obvious in the literature written around it, that doesn't mean South was not a part of Mahabharata. So this was one. Then in B.R. Chopra Mahabharata, there is this episode where Duryodhan falls down and Draupadi says, "Andhe ka putra andha." Yeah, and there was discussion going around that, and somebody's like, Draupadi hurt his ego, so it was only fair. I mean, she called upon her humiliation. Yeah, so that was the other thing. I'm like, okay, even if she said, what she went through is not. You cannot justify what happened to her based on that one incident. That's one thing. But the other thing is the image of Draupadi, that she's always this angry young woman, who's always ready to fight, who only thinks about revenge. That itself is not true for Draupadi. But when people think of Draupadi, that's the only image they have. Yeah. So, and then of course, Karn, the much spoken about hero or anti-hero, if we may talk about. आजकल आप देखोगे तो he is the symbol of oppression of Hinduism. He's paraded as somebody who was discriminated because of his caste, and everybody wants to do justice to Karn. That story is there. Now, if you go back and look at Mahabharata, the character of Karn is actually very different from what we hear nowadays. So there were some of these triggers where based on which I used to write some Facebook posts. And Praveen Tiwari ji, who's the publisher, who's the a person in Bloomsbury, he came back and he said, what you write is very interesting. A lot of it is not even known to people. So why don't you write something that is from Mahabharata? There is a lot of fiction around Mahabharata and some extremely good fiction, yeah, no doubt about it. So why don't you write about it? Write about what is in Mahabharata. So that's how the book came about. Now, before I say much else, I do want to say that I cannot claim to be an expert on Mahabharata, so to say, because it is vast. You can keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper into it. So what I am going to present is a Laukik view of Mahabharata. Yeah? V.S. Suptankarji, who is the editor of the Bori Critical Edition, he's written a beautiful book. I think it's not a book, so to say, it's a collection of his lectures. There are 4 lectures. And it's compiled in a book called On the Meaning of Mahabharata. I think it's one of the best books ever, very crisp, but where you understand why Mahabharata is the way it is and how should we understand Mahabharata. Yeah? So it has different levels. One is you understand it at the Laukik level, the other is you understand it at the cosmological level or the Adhyatmic level. What we will do today is focus more on the Laukik level of it, because I think even if we understand that part, life dhanya ho jayegi. I think we'll get something out of it. Yeah, so that's what I believe. So that's been my focus for now. Then there are other things. So when I was saying the things that get spoken about Mahabharata, people say, "Arey, why become so passionate?" At the end of the day, it's another story. Story तो है, क्या फर्क पड़ता है? किसी का कुछ भी लिखने दो. And it's very interesting. In the Indian knowledge system, there is a very clear categorization of different kinds of Shastras we have. We have Shruti Shastras, we have Smriti Shastras. Even in the Smriti Shastras, we have Dharma Shastras, we have Itihas, we have Puran. Everything is very different. The Purans are called Puran. Itihas is called Itihas. There must be a reason to that, right? Our ancestors knew what they were talking about. So if they are calling it Itihas, means there was something to it. They would have just called it a Puran and it would still have been okay, right? Now there is this thing between is Puran Itihas or not. We'll probably talk about it later. But what I'm saying is they called it Itihas. So the next question people say, Itihas. How is Itihas possible? It is said for both Ramayana and Mahabharata. कि अरे ऐसा हो सकता है क्या कि पत्थर डाल दो पानी पे एंड पत्थर तैर जाएगा एंड द वानर सेना will cross. Is that even possible? That is all humbug. These are all just stories. Yeah, they'll say. Is it possible for somebody to just jump across from here to there, from Bharat to Sri Lanka, like current day Sri Lanka, wherever that Lanka was at that time? All this is bakwas, doesn't happen. Ye sab miracle वगैरह doesn't make sense. It doesn't appeal to my scientific brain. We are all scientific today, right? So it doesn't appeal to our scientific brain. Logically, it is not possible. So then why is it Itihas? It is not Itihas. It doesn't give us dates. Like if you see how history has been written abroad, right? There is a proper chronicling of kab hua, kaise hua. There is a focus on dates. There is nothing like that given to us. Or at least that's what we think. It is not given to us. And hence it is not Itihas, it is not history. Doesn't matter. Everybody has the right to twist it around and say however they want. Okay, that's fair enough. There is no, we are not so dogmatic in our dharma, in our civilization. So it's okay. People can have their views. But the point is, we at least need to understand why it is called Itihas. And even before that, what is Itihas? I think if we understand what is Itihas and we take it from there, both Ramayana and Mahabharata will start making a lot more sense to us. Yeah. So I will share a few slides and then basically continue my bakar. So I'll just share a few slides to just put the context out there. Also to give you a break from just seeing my face. Oh, sorry. How do I?
You can do full screen, yeah.
So what is Itihas? Itiha Asa. Itiha Asa very simply translates to so it was, or so it happened, or it happened, yeah. Basically, it is talking about something that definitely happened in the past. That is what is called Itihas. Again, give it to our ancestors. They did not call everything and anything Itihas. They just called Ramayana and Mahabharata Itihas. Yeah, so there must be something to it, something that has happened in the past. But then what about all these stories which seem like miracles to us, which seem very illogical to us? What about that? Why is it written in that way? Yeah. So the definition of itihas, actually we might call it history, but it is not so. Itihas is called, the definition of itihas as given in Vachaspatyam is dharmartha kama mokshanam upatesha samandvitam purvavruta kathayuktam itihasam prachakshate. Now here it's very important. It has two parts. Purvavrutam kathayuktam. Yeah, purvavrutam kathayuktam. Purvavrutam means it something that has happened in the past. So whatever you read as itihas it is an event that has happened in the past, and kathayuktam, and it is said in a way, it is said in a story form. Now why is it said in a story form? Because the objective is not only to document history. That is definitely an objective, but not the only objective. The main objective is dharmartha kama mokshanam upadesha samandvitam. Upadesham samandvitam. Upadesha. The learnings, it is, the Shastra is written to teach us something. Teach us what? Teach us about dharma, artha, kama, moksha. These are the four purushartha. Now to talk about purushartha will take a lot of time. I think we all understand, so I'm not going deep into it. But essentially it means it is about teaching us or giving us lessons to live our lives in the society with each other. So it is to leave us with these learnings from an event that had happened in the past, said in a way that is easy to understand to everybody. And that is why Mahabharata is also called Pancham Veda. We know Ved Upanishads are the base of the Hindu civilization, of the Hindu Sanskriti, of the Hindu thought. Yeah. The way we look at the world, our perspective towards divinity, towards the society, towards the individual relations that we have, is somehow based on the view, the perspective that is developed through the wisdom coming through the Vedas. Now, what Mahabharata is Mahabharata is called the Pancham Veda because through the itihas, through the Shastra of Mahabharata, Vyasji has communicated or has tried to present that wisdom to us in a way that is understandable. One is theory, one is actual application of those concepts. Through the lives of Bharat Vansha, we have to learn, or we are supposed to learn how to lead our lives. And this leading our lives has to be in accordance with dharma. Now, what is dharma? We'll come to it at a later point again. So, in accordance with dharma, in a way that the society sustains, in a way that everybody just doesn't survive, but actually thrives, in which the society thrives and the individual thrives. So, that is the objective of this itihas. One, definitely telling us the history of our ancestors. And second, said in a way that we actually take away learnings from it. And it is just not a documentation of the past. Yeah. So that is what itihas is. Now we have to understand who wrote this itihas. Because, there is this view that the history is written by victors. And hence, whoever writes the history is always going to be the good person out there. And if the history was written by the one who lost, then it would be very different. This is what we are usually told. Yeah. Hence, a lot of times people put forth this argument when a lot of Indologists, they look at, people especially from abroad, people, when the Europeans came and they started looking at our Shastras, they were like, oh, victors write histories. Hence, Kauravas are the bad ones and Pandavas are the good ones. Also, they'll give all these arguments that Pandavas have broken rules throughout the war. So actually, they are the bad ones. In reality, they were the bad ones. But in the Mahabharata, the narrative is twisted because victors write history, right? But is it so in this case? Both in the case of Ramayana as well as Mahabharata, especially in the case of Mahabharata. Who wrote it? We are told it comes to us from Krishna Dvaipayan Vyas. Who was Krishna Dvaipayan Vyas? He was the biological father of Dhritarashtra, Pandu and Vidur. We know this, right? We know the story of Mahabharata. We know Satyavati, the queen of Shantanu. Shantanu dies. Vyas Muni is actually the son of Satyavati before her marriage to Shantanu. He is called for Nayog. So we all know all of that. We know that story. So he was the biological father of Dhritarashtra, Pandu and Vidur. He is the grandfather of Kauravas and Pandavas. He is the great grandfather of Abhimanyu and great great grandfather of Parikshit, great 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 grandfather of Janmajay. Now, why I write Janmajay, I'll come to it again in the next slide. So essentially, here we are talking about someone who is equally biologically related to both Kauravas and Pandavas. There is no need for him to be biased. The blood relation is equally strong. Yeah. So for him to show somebody good or bad, it's not in his interest. He is not on the payrolls of the Pandavas. That we have to understand. Yeah, like in most cases, like European history or most history which is written by somebody who reports into the king. Yeah, he'll be one of the ministers, one of the historians who gets patronage from the king. Here that is not the case. Here is a man who is equally biologically related to both sides. So the chances of his becoming biased for while writing the narrative is very less. And knowing this is very important. Hence, the history is not written by victors here, it is written by a person unbiased as their biological grandfather. Yeah? Very important to understand. Now, how and when was Mahabharata narrated? So, again, many times people are like, people will always say there are many different versions. Koi kidhar ka hai, koi kidhar ka hai. Everybody has done research, they'll come up with Mahabharata. Of course, what Bori has done is immensely important in bringing Mahabharata to us in this form. But Bori wasn't the only one. This has happened before. So if you see the Gita Press Mahabharata, even in that they have tried to combine the Dakshinatya with the northern recession, and they've tried to put in shlokas which are not in the northern one to highlight what comes in the Dakshinatya and stuff like that. The Bombay edition, the Bengal edition, which were done, some kind of critical additions were made by them as well. Of course, Bori went a step ahead and did a comprehensive exercise. So that's a different thing. But just in general, from the text, how do we know the Mahabharata? How did it come to us? Yeah. So we all know it was composed by Rishi Krishna Dwaipayan Vyas. We know that. So after Mahabharata ended, he wanted to create some work for the future generations. And through, he wanted to create a Shastra, create an Itihas of his own kids, whatever had happened, in a way that people in the coming generations can learn from it. So he composed it. And it was first narrated to two of his students. One was his son, Shukadev. Yeah, so he narrated it to Shukadev and Vaishampayan. Now, next what happened? Janmajay. So, I showed you in the previous slide that Janmajay is Abhimanyu's grandson. So, Abhimanyu's son is Parikshit, Parikshit's son is Janmajay. Janmajay had organized a Sarpasatra, which is called a snake sacrifice, so to say, if you translate it in English. Yeah? So, it was a Sarpa Yagna. And in that Yagna, it was a grand big Yagna where a lot of rishis, maharishis, everybody had come to participate. And of course, Krishna Dwaipayan Vyasji had also come there along with the students. So Janmajay asked him, he says that my ancestors, his ancestors are both Kauravas and Pandavas, right? So again, the other thing, while we call the branch of Dhritarashtra as Kuru as Kaurav, if somebody calls Pandavas as Kauravas, then that is also not misplaced. And I'll tell you why. Because the word Kaurav, it comes from Kuru. Kuru is the common ancestor of everybody. Dhritarashtra, Pandu, Vidur, everybody. Yeah? So he's the common ancestor of Shantanu, whose successors are all these guys, and Kauravas and Pandavas. But just to separate them, just so that we have the right identification, the side of Dhritarashtra is called Kaurav, and the side of Pandu is called Pandavas. That's the general understanding that we have, and that's how it is in Mahabharata as well. Anyways, so Janmajay says that my ancestors were men of great strength and wisdom. In spite of that, they fought this treacherous war of Mahabharata, where generations of soldiers, generations of warriors got killed. Literally, the Kshatriya warriors were eliminated from the surface of planet Earth, from Bharatvarsha, so to say. So why did they fight this war? I want to know more about it. So he's told that Vyasji has composed this entire history, and Vyasji then tells Vaishampayan that why don't you narrate it? So Vaishampayan ji actually narrates the story of Kauravas and Pandavas to Janmajay, or rather to that gathering. All the guests who had gathered, who had participated in the yagna in front of everybody. Vaishampayanji starts this narration. Also, this is not a monologue. Yeah, it's not as if Vaishampayanji is just talking. There is a little bit of conversation between them. There are different questions which Janmajay asks, and Vaishampayanji tries and addresses some of them as he goes along. Yeah. So anyway, so that was the first public narration of Mahabharata. Now there are a lot of rishis who've come in that gathering. So what happens? One of the guests is Rishi Ugrashrava Sauti. Now Rishi Ugrashrava Sauti listens to this Mahabharata, participates in this yagna, and then he is a rishi. He's roaming around. He's telling stories. He was a kathavachak. Yeah. So he's traveling around, and he reaches this ashram of Rishi Shaunak, where Rishi Shaunak is sitting with his students. It's a Gurukul, and they're sitting, and they ask him, they're like, Ugrashravaji, where are you coming from? So he tells them, oh, I had attended this Sarpa Satra of Janmajay, and they want to know more. What happened in that Sarpa Satra? And he says, oh, I heard the Mahabharata. Now, the students of Shaunak Muni, they want to hear the Mahabharata. So, Ugrashrava Sauti, he starts reciting, he starts narrating the Mahabharata that he had heard in the Sarpa Satra of Janmajay. And this is the version that we know. So, the account of Ugrashrava Sauti ji hearing Mahabharata in Janmajay Sarpa Satra is what we have. And that is why, if you see the beginning of Mahabharata, the very first shloka, it says, Narayana Namaskritya, Devi Chaiva Saraswati. So, this one, I'll just read that. Narayanam Namaskritya, Naram Chaiva Narottamam, Devi Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udarye. So, this is the first shloka which Ugrashrava Sauti says. And he basically is doing Naman. So every parva starts with this shloka, where Vaishampayan and also Sauti, they are saying, I do my Naman to Narayan Narottama, to the Uttam Nara, and to Saraswati and Vyas Muni, through whom this Jaya, this story of Mahabharata has come to us. Yeah. So this is how the story begins, and then Ugrashrava Sauti gives a little bit of context about what he knows about how Mahabharata was written, vagere, and then he jumps into the story, which is then narrated by Vaishampayan going on. Yeah. So this is just a little bit of trivia around how Mahabharata was narrated and how we know Mahabharata. So it's like a third person account that we have. That is the manuscript available to us, and that is also how Gita Press starts. That is also how the Southern Recension starts. That is also how the Gauri Critical Edition starts. Yeah. Okay. Now, what does Mahabharata cover? Yeah. So, as we said, it is not just a simple documentation of how things happened by date. No, it's not just that. It's a lot more than that, what Mahabharata has. Because what did we hear in the beginning? Ramji told us, right, that anything that is present in Mahabharata is present elsewhere. But what is not present in Mahabharata, na kutrachit, you won't find it anywhere else. So what are all those topics that we hear, that we learn from Mahabharata? Yeah? So, and this is Ved Vyasji himself saying. Now you see, some of these shlokas you won't find in the critical edition, but it is in the Gita Press edition, and I like it, so I have used some of these. Yeah. So he says that I have created this kavya which has Vedahasya Sa Anga Upanishada, so which has the knowledge of Vedas and Upanishad with all the angas, which is Vedanga. So all the six, it has information, it has wisdom of the Vedangas, Upanishads, and Vedas. So this is that Shastra. What else? It has all the understanding of how to live life in different stages, which is what we call the ashram. So we have brahmacharya, we have grahasthashram, we have vanprastha, we have sannyas. Yeah? So in all this, how should people behave? So learnings about that. What is the dharma of all these ashrams? And in this, we'll be faced with many issues, right? There will be jara, there will be illness, there will be mrityu, there will be old age, all of this. How do you understand this? How do you make sense of this? How do you deal with it? So there is information and knowledge about that as well. What else? It has information about Nyaya Shiksha. So how to teach? What are the methods of learning and teaching? What is the, how should administration be? How should policy be? So that is around Raj Dharma. How does that happen? Things about how and when charity should be done, stages of life. So the Hindu dharma, the civilization, the Vedic view of life is not linear. You're born and you are dead. No, no, that's not it. We are based on karma siddhanta, and karma siddhanta and reincarnation go together, right? So understanding of this whole cycle of life is that is what we get through Mahabharata. What else? Apart from all this, there is some very clear data as well. Yeah, we spoke about data. There is very clear data. What kind of data? It has a complete enumeration of geography of this land of Bharatvarsha. There is much more else, but at least of that, yeah. It talks about the different Janapadas. It talks about Tirthas. Tirtha Yatra again is not a current thing. It has been going on forever. We see that in Ramayana. We see that in Mahabharata. So different places of pilgrimage, different rivers, different mountains, different forests, right from ऊपर से नीचे, उत्तर से दक्षिण, पूरब से पश्चिम. Everything is given in a very detailed manner in Mahabharata. Yeah. Apart from that, what I've not written here, if we think of it from a history perspective, it also has an entire listing of some 50 plus generations of the Bharat Vansha. So the ancestors of Janmajay, starting from Manu, it comes down all the way. So it talk about Yayati, it talk about Kuru, it will talk about Kuru, it talks about Bharat and all of that. So some of them are spoken about in a lot more detail, others are just listed. So 50 plus generations, and in the book I've given a tree, the family tree of the Bharat Vansha. So even that is documented. So so as I was saying, the way Itihas is written is definitely to document information of the past or future generations, but it is not just that, it also has a lot of wisdom of how we should lead our lives based on the stories of the past, yeah, based on the history of the past. So in general, eventually Vyasji says that I have put everything. Yachapi sarvagam vastu tachaiva pratipaditam. Whatever is important for people in leading their lives, for people and society, all that is present in Mahabharata. Okay. So this is what Vyasji himself says to Brahmaji, because he wants to find somebody who can actually write down this epic. And then there is this legend of Ganpati ji agreeing to write it, and that a lot of people have heard. Okay, so this is what Mahabharata covers, and I'll take one simple example of geography, yeah, so that the point is clear to everybody. So there is no diagram given in Mahabharata. But if we have to draw a diagram, we actually can, because it clearly enumerates to us what is in the north, what is in the south, what is in the east, what is in the west, and not once, multiple times. Two big episodes where this is much clearly given is one during the Digvijay Yatra. So after Yudhishthir gets Khandav-prastha and they turn it to Indraprastha, this is before their Vanvas and all that. The four Pandavas, if somebody needs to do the Rajasuya Yagna, he needs to first ensure that all the kings of Bharatvarsha agree to his Chakravartin, agree to his kingship. Yeah, so they agree to his sovereignty. So for that, the four Pandavas, Bhim, Arjun, Nakul, Sahadev, they go in different directions to talk to the different kings. Some of the kings they have to fight with, others just agree and say, yeah, we accept, and they give gifts for Yudhishthir. So in that, there is a clear, we get to know very well which are the different Janapadas in different parts of Bharat. Yeah, very, very detailed information. Then there is another area. So this comes in the Sabha Parva. In Bhishma Parva, before the war starts, the armies have left for Kurukshetra. Dhritarashtra is sitting with Sanjay, and before Gita happens and all of that, Dhritarashtra wants to know more about the geography of Jambudvipa and the other dweeps around it. So there's a lot of information there. But then for Jambudvipa, Sanjay goes on to tell him about the different Janpadas. He talks about different rivers, mountains, forests, everything that comes in that area. And very specifically, so I mean, when it comes to Janpad, he actually speaks about some 200 plus Janpadas. So there are different states, the kingly or the states in Bharatvarsha at that time. And in that, you also have the mention of some states which are not Kshatriya ruled. Yeah. So the kings of those states were actually not from the Kshatriya community. Some of them were from Vaishya Jati, some of them from Shudra Jati, a lot of them from Shudra Jati, actually. Yeah. So and some of the names he mentioned are like Kashmir, Kaling. In fact, even KK, some of these are not Kshatriya ruled states. These are from the different Jatis in the Varda system. Yeah. So there are non-Kshatriya communities. There are Mlecha tribes, so the Yavan, Shaka, you find mention of all of that. You find mention of Chil, so Huna, yeah. So all these which are considered the non-Vedic tribes, the Mlecha tribes, they are also present in some parts of Akhanda Bharat from that viewpoint, because we are talking not just about Bharat current day, we are talking everything from Afghanistan, going a little bit into Tibet, which was called Uttar Kuru, and then coming to the south. So there are mentions of that. Then there are mentions of some 150 rivers across, starting from what you see in Kashmir to going down. And you will be surprised, because lot of these names we use till now. You hear about Godavari, you hear about Kaveri, Ganga, Saraswati, of course, all that is there, yeah. So it's very surprising that while we talk about it as a forgotten history, while people say things like, oh, Bharat is a very recent construct, only because of Britishers we have India. A lot of people will say that. No. If you actually go back and read our Shastras, this continuity has been there. This awareness that it is all one Sanatani Sanskriti, and that although there are different Janapadas, eventually it is all Bharat Varsha, Jambu Dvipa, and there is continuity and linkage has been known forever. Yeah. The other thing, is it just a description? Because there can be description. What about the interaction between the different princely states that were there at that time, the Janapadas that were there from north south? Was it still a story only of the north? Because you can still have description of the south, while nobody really participating in anything that's going on in Mahabharata. So even that's not true. In every big event that has happened, so say the Rajsuya Yagna or Draupadi Swayamvar, or even the war, so to say, which happens eventually, you see participation of everybody. You have the Pandya kings from the south, you have the the Dravid kings who are also in the south. The Kerala, very clearly mentioned, they are all there. Kalings, of course, yeah, they all are participating, very actively participating. Some of their names are also given, who played a very important role in the war itself. So it is not as if it was only south-south. It's only north-north. The south has played an equally interesting role. And then, as I said, there are multiple pilgrimage descriptions. We do Char Dham. We have Gangotri, Yamunotri, Kedarnath, Badrinath. In fact, Badrinath comes so many times. Pandavas have been to Badrinath. It's called Badrika Ashram at that time. So this dharmic continuity has also been there since then. Yeah, we actually trace our roots back then, and I want to share this personal anecdote with you. So close to Badrinath, there is this place called Mana. So from Badrinath, it's actually 3 kilometers. You can walk to Mana. It's a beautiful little village. It's almost the last village on the Indo-Tibetan border in Uttarakhand, that side. And there we have 2 caves. One is called the Vyas Gufa, and one is called the Ganesh Gufa. Yeah. So it is believed that Vyasji actually composed the Mahabharata sitting in one of the gufas over there. And is it just belief, or do we have a textual reference for it? So actually, in the southern recession, the Dakshinatya reading of the Mahabharata that we have, they actually mention that somewhere that in the Himavata, in the foothills of Himalayas, Vyasji had written this epic in 3 years. So that is there, and even today they have this gufa mark there, Vyas Gufa. It's a beautiful feeling. You actually feel like you are in a place where your ancestors had walked some 5,000, 7,000 years ago. So if you go to Badrika Ashram, if you go to Badrinath, ever, definitely visit one. Okay, what else? So all this is great, yeah. So we have all this information, we have history, we have genealogy, all that. But there is one theme in Mahabharata, and that theme is actually what makes it so close to the hearts of all of us. That is what makes it so relatable. And that underlying theme is of dharma. Dharma. Dharyate iti dharma. There are so many discourses that are based on what is dharma. So many times this comes, dharyate iti dharma. Dharnat dharmiti ahu, dharmo dharyati praja. So what does it mean? Dharyate iti dharma. Dharma, the root word is dhri. Dhri is also the root word for dharti. What does dharti do? Dharti upholds. Dharti sustains us. So that overarching principle which upholds whom? The praja. What is praja? Praja is actually all of us, the society. that overarching principle which allows the sustenance of the society. That is called dharma. Yeah, and we are talking about a long-term sustenance here. Sustenance can only happen if there is sustainability. Sustainability can only come if people have the opportunity to thrive, survive, and grow. Yeah, or rather, survive, grow, and thrive. So, dharma is that overarching principle that allows people to grow, develop in their own fields, not just in artha, so not just in terms of money, yeah, wealth, prosperity, that is also important. In fact, it's in the four areas where Trivida, if we talk about, are most important: dharma, artha, and kama. Kama, desire. I think you already had a good lecture by Nitin Sridharji on the place of Kama in the Purusharth. Yeah, Kama is that desire which makes us work in the first place. Kama is that desire which makes us have kids in the first place. So Kama is important for just the presence of the society. So that is one. And then once there is calm, then when you have the society, you need resources, you need artha for ensuring the society thrives and grows. One, when you have this, you need a dharmic structure around it to ensure that this becomes more sustainable. So you have Raj Dharma, you have policies, you have ways about how to interact with each other. What is good, what is bad, what are virtues, what are vices. All this comes through dharma. But the essential meaning of it is dharate iti dharma, that which upholds is dharma. So throughout in Mahabharata, we hear about dharma. We hear about all the dharma eva hato hanti dharmo rakshati rakshita. We've heard this so many times. The one who protects dharma, only dharma protects. Dharma protects only him who protects dharma. Yato dharma tatho jaya. Where there is dharma, there will be success. Prosperity will come to only there where there is dharma. Then one thing is very clearly mentioned, which Sanjay says in Gita: Yatra Yogeshwara Krishno, Tat Yatra Partho Dhanurdaraha, Tatra Shri Vijayo Bhuti Dhruva Niti Mati Mama. This is definitely where there is Yogeshwar Krishna and where there is Arjun, there only there will be Shri and Vijay. Now, why is he saying that? So you see here, actually, Vedvyas is putting his foot down and saying the dharma was with Krishna and the Pandavas. And why is he saying that? To understand that, we have to understand Mahabharata in its originality, in its authentic form that we have. Now, again, authentic is a little misplaced. In the form that we can trace to be the most consistent is what I can say. Yeah, to understand all this. Now, again, why is dharma important, and why is Vyasmuni talking about dharma all the time? Yeah. Um, in the society that we live, we have multiple roles to play, and every role has its own responsibilities, rights, and duties. Yeah, I'm a daughter, I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm also a professional. Yeah, I'm also a part of the community. I'm also a citizen of Bharat. I have all these hats. I have all these roles to play. Now, these individual roles have some responsibilities and kartavyas that I have to fulfill. These kartavyas are not always mutually, they are not always, many times they come into conflict with each other. Yeah. How should I prioritize? That is what is dharma sankat, what we call ethical dilemma. क्या करें? ये भी करना है, वो भी करना है, ये भी सही है, वो भी सही है, या कई बार ये भी इतना सही नहीं है, वो भी इतना सही नहीं है. But how do I prioritize? I have to make a decision. I have to make a decision. This is what we call dharma sankat. This is what we call an ethical dilemma. Now, in Mahabharata, every person, every character is faced with a dharma sankat at some point in life. Every person, starting from Kunti, in fact, not even starting from Kunti, even before that, yeah. Shantanu wants to marry Satyavati. What should Bhishma do? Or rather, what should Shantanu do? Should he marry and then, ensure his eldest son, Bhishma, should he take his right of kingdom away, take his right of being a Raja away? Should he do that? What should Bhishma do? Is his responsibility towards his father? What is his responsibility towards Hastinapur? Because he is the crown prince of Hastinapur. What should Satyavati do after her sons pass away? After Chitrangit passed away, after Vichitravirya passed away. Should she let the queens be, or should it's okay to call Vyas Muni and do Niyoga for the perpetuation of the race? At every point, Arjun, we know, should he fight? Should he not fight? Again, Bhishma, Drona, should they fight? Should they not fight? Because they have certain responsibilities in one role, they have other responsibilities in other role, and then there is other kartavya which is important from a dharmic perspective, from a long-term, larger sustainability perspective. Some people could take that decision, others couldn't take that decision. But that is essentially why Mahabharata is so relatable, because everybody is struggling with their own dilemmas, everybody is struggling with their sankat. Ki kya kare? What is the right thing to do? And in their heads, they have all done the right thing according to them. But then what is the larger context? Apne hisab se to everybody is right. Then why is it that Mahabharata says that, so Ugraswara Sauti, when he talks about Mahabharata, he says, Itihasa pradipena moh avarana ghatina. It takes away the moha, it takes away that delusion, the ignorance of your mind is taken away through the itihas, through this light of itihas, through this Mahabharata, the ignorance of the mind is taken away. So why is he saying that? Essentially, what Mahabharata has tried to do is, through this story of our ancestors, try to bring forth in front of us that there are different ways people behave and react in the society when they are faced with a problem. How should one prioritize? What is the right way to do? What should be the larger context that should be kept in mind while we take our decisions? So that is why Mahabharata is important, and that is why Mahabharata is so relatable. Now the question is, if this is so, and if we do want to imbibe these learnings of Mahabharata, we actually have to know the story for what it is. If we do not know the story for what it is, our takeaways will be jumbled. Our heroes will be jumbled. Our judgment will be skewed. And when that happens, the whole purpose of the learnings which Vyasji had thought would come to us will not come to us. Yeah. And again, as we saw in the beginning, yeah. So taking Draupadi's example, by imposing this story on her that, oh, Andhe ka putra andha, it has become so easy, right? You suddenly start having a soft corner for Duryodhan, that it was not his fault that it is Andhe ka putra. And suddenly you start having this, you start looking at Draupadi in a different light. Otherwise, Draupadi is called a Sati, a great woman. But suddenly, with this impulsive rhetoric of hers, she falls down in our eyes, right? She did something wrong. She should get punishment for it. So easy. So what do you take away from it? Whereas in reality, she had actually not said anything of that sort. She had never said Andhe ka putra andha. In fact, there are many things about Draupadi. You know, there is another narration which says, oh, actually, Draupadi liked Karna. Draupadi was in love with Karna. A lot of people will tell you that, Aj. Yeah? And this whole dhikkar to this entire misogynistic, patriarchal Hindu society, she couldn't marry Karna because he was anyways being oppressed because of his caste. So, and she had to compromise marrying Pandavas whom she did not want to marry, plus she was married to these 5 people. So, ek jhatke mein, we become a casteist, patriarchal, misogynist society. Now, that's the other thing, right? If we do not own our itihas, people will own our itihas, tell us our stories, and brand us in a way where we ourselves become ashamed of our past. And this is what is happening today. The narrative is not in our hands. And why is narrative not in our hands? Because we are not owning it. We don't know what is there in our itihas. And if we want to own back our itihas, it is very important for us to know our itihas, right? So if you see, so Draupadi, we saw a few of these examples. The other, I will leave it to you to actually read in the book. So let's talk about Karna, a victim of caste oppression, always told to us. Yeah, he's called the Sut Putra, Sut Putra, Sut Putra. Every time he's called the Sut Putra. In the television serial, he's called the Sut Putra again and again, and somehow we are made to feel that Sut Putra is somehow a very derogatory term, and he is being discriminated for it all the time. Now, you know who is a Suta? A Suta is actually a mixed jati, and there are many such mixed jatis in Mahabharata. Mixed jati of who? Kshatriya father and a Brahman mother. You know, if we even look at if we accept the hierarchy as we are told about the Varna Vyavastha, these two are the topmost. The Kshatriyas are the rulers, and Brahmins are the ones who actually have the knowledge, are supposed to be, the ones with the sattvic good and all of that. Anyways, so he is actually the son of a community which is a mixed jati of a Kshatriya father and a Brahmin mother. He actually does participate in all the Vedic rituals. In fact, this whole thing about Duryodhana of Dronacharya not accepting Karna because he is a Sutputra is actually wrong. Anybody who has read any version of the Mahabharata will tell you that Karna was actually a student of Dronacharya. Karna actually learned warfare with Dronacharya till Karna was insistent he wanted to learn the Brahmastra. And he went to Dronacharya and he said, I want to learn the Brahmastra, aap mujhe Brahmastra sikhao. And Drona said, no, you're not yet right, you're not yet capable, and you cannot learn the Brahmastra, I cannot teach you the Brahmastra. And he's like, I want to learn the Brahmastra at any cost, and he goes to Parshuramji. Yeah. So the biggest masala that has been added to the story of Karna is this, that he was, he wanted to learn. It feels aaj ke din mein somebody is willing to learn, is a student, a very dedicated student, very skilled student, very buddhiman student, and a school rejects him. Of course, that is a big atrocity done to the student, right? And we will all rally in support of the student. Karna, that image of Karna has been created. In no version, no manuscript of Mahabharata is this true. Yeah. So, in fact, Karna himself, throughout Mahabharata, except for that one taunt which Bhim makes in the beginning, that Arey, you are a Sutputra, you go and hold the chariot, the reins of the chariot. Not once has Karna been made aware of he being lower or higher or anything because of his jati. There is no mention of it. And Sutputra, many are called Sutputra. We saw Ugrashrava Sauti. Sauti is Suta. He is also from the Suta community. Yeah. So one thing about the Suta community which we pretty much know is that they were charioteers. They were Sarathis. Yeah. Now Sarathi by itself is not aisa taisa profession. Sarathis have a big role to play in a king's life. Yeah, they are the guides, the mentors, and they are also the ones responsible for ensuring that the king is safe whenever they go into the war. So Sarathi has a big role to play. That is why Krishna becomes Sarathi. So is it that he is doing a job under his level? No. Sarathi played a very important role. And that is why Adhirath, who is the father of Karna, was actually a close friend of Dhritarashtra. And because of that, actually, Karna could go and study with Dronacharya. Anyway, so there are other Sutputras as well. So who, for example, Kichak. Kichak, we pretty much know that in the Agyatva, Draupadi was working with Sudeshna, who was the queen of King Virat, and Kichak was Sudeshna's brother, and he saw Draupadi and he wanted her at any cost, and then Bhim kills Kichak. So Kichak is also a Sutputra because Kichak is the son of Kekai. A lot of Kekai kings were actually Sut. So Sutas were actually not somebody discriminated against or anything like that. They played many different roles, and even through the Vyavastha that we had, they could be warriors. They were, of course, charioteers, Rathasarthi. They were also bards and storytellers and historians like Ugrashrava Sauti. Yeah, we have Suta Goswami, who we know also narrated, who's very big in Vaishnava Dharma. Yeah, so this narrative again of caste oppression falls flat, especially related to Karna when we talk about the Mahabharata. And there are many such instances, many such views about personalities. Many such personalities become clear when we actually read the Mahabharata. So for Yudhishthir, for that matter, yeah, generally people will say, "Arey, Yudhishthir was not capable. He was anyways not a good warrior. He gambled away his wife. God knows why he's called Dharmaraja." Now there was a reason why he's called Dharmaraja, and it's very clear throughout the Mahabharata text why he's called Dharmaraja. Not every decision is about immediate gratification. Not every action is about impulsive decisions. Yeah, it requires whatever decision you take can have a long-term implication, and it needs to be done very, very thoughtfully. And Yudhishthir actually had that, unlike anybody else. Yudhishthir and Vidur. So there is a reason he's called Dharmaraja, and that comes out through Mahabharata. So I can go on and on, but yeah. So just one point I want to make before I close. Yeah, the biggest myth of Mahabharata is something perpetrated by Hindus on ourselves. We say महाभारत को घर में मत रखो, महाभारत को मत पढ़ो, क्योंकि महाभारत घर पे रखोगे और पढ़ोगे तो लड़ाई हो जाएगी. I think no bigger harm has been done on the Hindus by having this kind of manyata. We just saw Mahabharata is called the Pancham Veda. Mahabharata is all about dharma. It is all about helping us deal with our dharma sankata. It is all about helping us identify right heroes to whom we can look up to and lead our lives. This Shastra, this Itihas, we said हम नहीं पढ़ेंगे. वैसे we'll go and fight for अरे वेद नहीं पढ़ने दे रहे, why are Brahmins owning knowledge, ये सब rallies we'll go and do. But when it is given to us सामने से आगे कि नहीं आप ये पढ़ो, this is more practical, we say नहीं हम नहीं पढ़ेंगे क्योंकि लड़ाई हो जाएगी. Yeah. So this is the biggest myth, and I hope this goes away from our society forever, and more people read the Mahabharata and learn from it. So before I stop blabbering, I will just show one last slide, which is about my book. Can you see it?
No, I think that it was starting to present and then it went off.
अभी है ठीक से?
Yeah, now it is. Yes.
So I told you the reason why I wrote this book or how this book came about. Again, I just want to put a caveat that I can't claim any expertise on it. Maybe the advantage I've had is that I actually went back and read the Gita Press Mahabharata. So that's the reference book I have used, along with cross-referencing with Bodhi Critical Edition and K.M. Ganguly's version, K.M. Ganguly's English translation, for coming up with the book. There are 3 parts to it. One, the first part is about the context. Actually, a lot of what I spoke today about how Mahabharata was written, the geographical, the geography included in Mahabharata, the genealogy, all of that. That forms the first part, which is the point there to make is that it is itihas, and it has a lot of information that we can relate to even today. So that part is the first part. Then in the second section, I have tried to bring out stories of personalities and events. So for example, Draupadi related stories about Draupadi, stories about Kunti, about Karn Duryodhan, about Krishna, Arjun. Why is it that Krishna and Arjun are called Narayana and Narottama? Yeah, why are they Nar Narayan? What was about their bond? We always hear about, when we talk about loyalty, we talk about Karn and Duryodhan. But was it so? How did their relationship grow and pan out, and how did it impact lives of them as well versus Bharatvarsha? So some of these stories I've tried to bring out from Mahabharata, as Vyasji has told us, and put it in a way that is fun to read, or that's at least been my hope towards that it becomes easy to read and easy to digest. And the third section is then a little bit about the trivia about Mahabharata, the legends and antiquity and the war formation. Yeah, so something around that. The pre-order link is already up. You can buy the book on Amazon.com, Kindle version for international, and Amazon.in for India. Both paperback and Kindle are available. Deliveries would begin from 18th July. And that's that. With that, I will stop and we can have a Q&A. बहुत बहुत आभार. Thank you so much.
Okay, straight to question. Ami, please say something about Ekalavya. There are lots of misconceptions about Dronacharya, how he was ill-treated by Dronacharya. So please enlighten us. Thank you.
Okay, so the story about Ekalavya, about Dronacharya taking Ekalavya's thumb is true. Yeah, but the way it is given in the Mahabharata is this, that Nishad Raj, the father of Ekalavya, he came to Dronacharya because everybody was going to Dronacharya. There were a lot of princes who'd gone to Dronacharya to make him the guru. And he says, my son wants to learn from you, so please accept him. Now, what Dronacharya does is that he looks at the people, students he has, yeah. He doesn't make any comment like, oh, he's not a Kshatriya, he's not this, he's not that. He doesn't say anything like that. He says, it just says that looking at the students he has, he says, no, I can't accept your son as a student. Yeah. So this is true. He does say that I cannot accept your son as a student. Now, Ekalavya goes and in spite of Guru not accepting, he starts practicing, which we know already. Wo kutte ke muh mein he puts all those, and Arjun and the other students get to know that there is this archer who's actually very, very good. And they go and tell Dronacharya that we met this guy, and Arjun is like, "Arey, aapne mujhe kaha tha that I'm going to be the best of the lot. Now I think there is somebody who's better than me." And all we are told is Dronacharya thinks about it for a few minutes, and he goes to he takes Arjun along, and they go to Ekalavya, and he says that you have to give me Guru Dakshina. So we already know the story, and he says, I give me your thumb, and he gives it. Yeah. Now, is this true? Yes, this is very true. This story has happened. Yeah. Now, there are multiple reasons people give. Mahabharata doesn't give us any reason for it. It just says that Dronacharya had promised Arjun that he will become the greatest archer, and hence he took the thumb of Ekalavya. Now, the Dakshinatya reading has interesting 2 shlokas after this. Dakshinatya reading says that very secretly Dronacharya showed Ekalavya how to shoot with his finger, without his thumb, so to say. Yeah. So this is what the Dakshinatya reading says. It has 2 shlokas there saying that Dronacharya showed Ekalavya how to shoot an arrow even without using his thumb. That part is definitely there. I mean that is there in the Dakshinatya reading. You don't find it in Gita Press. You don't find it in the Bodhi Critical Edition. Yeah. So we can even still ignore it. But did this happen? Yes, it happened. Was it unfair to Ekalavya? Probably. It was probably unfair to Ekalavya. Is it right to still have somebody as your teacher when that person has refused? That is also that is a bit of a gray area, right? When Dronacharya has said that I cannot accept you as my student, did Ekalavya doing that, was it right or not? That's one question. The punishment he got for it, the Guru Dakshina, was it fair? Maybe not. Yeah, it was maybe not fair. But to make it a caste thing is again a little misplaced. I'll tell you why. Because was it that throughout, except this one incident, was it that Nishads were not a part of anything? No, that is not true. Yeah. So, in fact, Jarasandha, who was the king of Magadha, a very powerful king who was against Krishna and all, Ekalavya's kingdom, Ekalavya, who becomes the king of his community going forward, they were very close. Ekalavya led a war against Dwarka. And it was in this war that actually Krishna killed Ekalavya. So Ekalavya is killed by Krishna. Krishna tells Arjun that in spite of his thumb gone, if he was present in this war of Mahabharata, you would have had a very tough time. He was that good a warrior. However, when he attacked Dwarka, I killed him. Yeah. So that is one. Second, you see a lot of Nishads participating in the Mahabharata war, especially on the side of the Kauravas. So they are part of that as well. Yeah. So it is not. So just taking this one example of him having to give his thumb, which was definitely an injustice on Ekalavya, to create a narrative of caste is not right. But on an individual level, yeah, but that is the truth, right? Life is not always fair. All that happened to Pandavas was not always fair. What happened to Dronacharya through his friend, the king of Panchal, that was not fair. So life is about dealing with unfairness and fairness and still going ahead with it. I don't think Ekalavya considered himself a victim like how we consider him to be. Yeah, that narrative is not in Mahabharata. But this is definitely there, that his thumb was taken away.
Ma'am, can you elaborate about the relationship between the Duryodhan daughter and actually Krishna was the father-in-law for Duryodhan? That is about the Lakshmana.
Correct. So in Mahabharata, we have no reference to that at all.
Okay.
There's nothing in the Mahabharata. I think it comes from the Bhagavad, but it is not in Mahabharata. In Mahabharata, we only know about one son of Duryodhan, which is Lakshmana. We don't have any reference to Lakshmana.
Okay, but it's a wonderful character. She served Krishna during his last time in a great manner.
Yeah.
So, so
Actually,
okay,
there
fine,
are
man.
lots of these things, yeah, which we think are from Mahabharata, but are actually not. So, for example, I'll give you, the story of Barbarik. Again, a very touchy story for a lot of people. That Barbarik is considered to be the son of Ghatotkacha, and we say that, and the story goes that because Barbarik was very strong and he had this Vardhan, that whichever side he fights from, that side will definitely win. Yeah, so the other side becomes weak. And knowing this, they say when Balbari comes to Krishna and he says, I want to participate in the war, Krishna cuts his head. And everybody's like, Arey, ye kya hai? How is it fair? This guy only wanted to come. So again, this is a very touchy topic in a lot of these narratives.
Yes.
This story does not exist in the Mahabharata at all. In any version of the Mahabharata. Okay. You take the Dakshinatya, you take the northern recession, you take the eastern, you take the western, whatever recession you take. Bori, of course, doesn't have it. This story is actually a folklore which comes from Skanda Puran, and then there have been other stories added around it somewhere because he's considered Katusham, a deity in Rajasthan. Rajasthan के एक कुलदेवता के रूप में है. So there are stories around that, but again, no reference in the Mahabharata. So it feels more like a folklore added to it. And this has happened. Actually, that's the thing, right? When you have a itihas which is so engrossing, so real, wherever it goes, people will attach themselves to it. People will attach their stories to it. And I'll give you an example from Christianity, for that matter. In Ethiopia and stuff, there are these cave paintings of Jesus, where Jesus, the entire story of, how we have the Bal Krishna story and the Natkhatta of Bal Krishna and stuff. Something like that has been done with Jesus as well. And Jesus is considered to be African. The painting is also more African, right? Rather than actually Jesus is being more Middle Eastern, right? So what happens is when you make it your own, people also add some stories to it. So the Barbarik story is something like that. This one comes from Bhagavad Puran. So I don't know where else can we reference it, or whether it's right or not right. But yeah, so not in Mahabharata. Just
how many versions of Mahabharata are existing?
Acha, okay. So this question, and I'll take the other question of Abhishek ji as well. So he asked that, is there any truth on the theory of multiple extrapolations of Mahabharata? Some scholars opine that references to Yavana Dhunaz is a proof that Mahabharata is in its present 1 lakh shloka form was compiled around 4th century AD. Okay, so I will not comment on the dating, yeah, because I'm not an expert on the dating part of it. But I'll tell you some references which we have from the Mahabharata. Okay. This Yavan, Mlech, all that. So there is a story of Yayati. Yayati is the Purvaj of Bharat, of Shantanu, of everybody. Yeah? Like many years ago, he is the Vanshaj, and he has 5 sons. Now these 5 sons are Yadu. So Yadu, from whom the Yadavs come, Kuru, from whom the Kauravas come, and the Kurus come eventually, and then there are 3 other sons. And it is said that Kuru eventually takes over the whole, what is now the Kuru dynasty, the Hastinapur and all of that. But the others go their ways. And then it talks about Yavans, which are from one of the sons as well, and Lech, which is from the other son as well. Yeah. And then there is Turvasu. So basically different, what we now call tribes, coming from the sons of Yayati. Actually, this has happened throughout. So for example, the Panchals actually also branch out from one of the Purvaj of, I think, Ajamir of Bharat and Kuru. Yeah. So this kind of stuff has already happened. Now, were there no Huns before 5th century AD? I don't know. I can't make any comment on that. But there are references in Mahabharata which talk about many different tribes. Yeah. Now, dating is not my domain, so I will not comment on that. The other thing about multiple extrapolations of Mahabharata, I think if you guys would have attended Adluri Bagchi ji's session, I'm sure he must have spoken about it. But the thing is, were there extrapolations? For sure. In fact, if you take the Gita Press version as well, right, there will be some parts which just seem force-fitted inside. Upar ka kuch hoga, niche ka kuch hoga, and then suddenly you have something else. So there are parts which, even in the Gita Press version, which is actually a sort of critical edition on which Neelkant ji has written a commentary, you find that there might be parts which might not actually fit in. Yeah, so that is there. So would there be extrapolations? For sure. We are talking, even if we talk about 5th century, it's been so many years, there are extrapolations, there might be. What Bori has tried to do is that all the different manuscripts, or as Dineshji was asking, different versions, there were many of those, yeah. Bori tried to compile all of them and give a structure in a way that the storyline is the most consistent and most prevalent. For example, if one manuscript has a story and it is not in any other manuscript, then it's a very high chance that the story was added in. Yeah, and it's not, because how is it that only one manuscript has it and not the others? So that way there were a lot of manuscripts which were compiled together and everything, and from which eventually the Bori critical edition was made. Now, when we say version, I don't know what we mean, whether we can call it version, because version is like we know the first version, then we know the second version, then we know the third version. Ye mujhe nahi malum how many versions were there, but there were many different manuscripts for sure. The beauty, however, is this: there might be certain events added, there might be certain stories added here and there in different manuscripts. But one thing which is common across most of these manuscripts, yeah, then be it the Bengal edition on which K.M. Ganguly version is based, or the Gita Press edition, which is main the northern one, or the Bori one, or even others which Bori had found, the characters of the people, the character description of the people is actually not very different. It is very consistent across. Yeah, there might be some story added here and there. कि कहीं में बोलेंगे कि अच्छा Draupadi said, I will not marry Karna. Most other versions don't have that. Yeah, so there will be some additions here and there, but the consistency is still there across. And the most consistent version is the Bori critical edition. And I think what even Sukhtankar ji says is that we don't know if it's the original, but it is the most oldest available to us, so to say. Yeah. So that is what we have, and I think that is why I really like the Gita Press edition, which has even more interesting gems which somehow are lost in the Bori one. But I think still these two are good enough. Even K.M. Ganguly or the Southern edition for that matter.
Can you give the reference to the Bori edition
Reference. So
that we can locate it?
Yeah. So Bori, if you do a Google search, you will find the Sanskrit version for free. Yeah. However, I think the translation done in English by Bibek Debroyji, that is based on the Bori edition. And I think there might also be Gujarati and Hindi translations based on Bori.
Anilji, is there any truth on the fact that the common people have like no place in Mahabharata? So I like read a blog on Mahabharata a few years back, a slightly left-leaning blog which says that it's all about kings and sages and warriors and princes, and there's nothing about the common people. They're sort of given away as gifts at times, etc. So do they have is anything told about the lives of common people in Mahabharata? Thank you.
A story, when we see a movie, for that matter, when the story is pivoted on certain things, you will focus on the story and not really about every other person going around on the street, right? There might be many people. That said, what do we know about the people per se? So we do know how the society was overall in the larger sense when Bhishma was in charge of the rule, when Yudhishthir in Indraprasth, the few years that he was there, how was the rule? How were the people? What kind of, that kind of stuff we have. We have some description about how the cities were. Even more in Ramayana. Ramayana mein to be it Lanka, be it Ayodhya, everything. Very clear descriptions of the cities. What did the different people do? All this is there. To some extent, even in Mahabharata, we know a little bit about how Lanka was. We know how Hastinapur was. Yeah, we know how the buildings were there. We know how happy or not happy the people were. What kind of activities they did. So that part is there. But the focus is on, as we saw, dharma, artha, kama, mokshana, updesham, samanvitam. So through the story, the idea is to communicate to us how do we lead our lives in a way aligned to dharma, in a more sustainable way. Yeah, that is there. Now, throughout Mahabharata, we also have stories of the past or normal people and all of that. So there is this section called Vyadha Gita. Yeah, in Vyadha Gita, it is a story about a person who sells meat, and he actually teaches dharma, the concepts of dharma, to a Brahman. Before that, there is a lady who teaches concepts of dharma to a Brahman, through her own life, and she gives a vyakhyan on that. So that kind of stuff is there. Yeah.
One thing that looking at the questions that have come up, Adluri and Bakchi ji, who were here, last week with us, they said that, in Mahabharata, we are looking for everything, for atomic bomb, for history, geography, and, science, except Dharma and Dharam Sankat and, all those things that you emphasized in your book and lecture also. So I think you clearly mentioned that in your book, I think second or third chapter, that the most important thing to look in Mahabharata is Purusharth, Dharma, Arth, Kam and Moksha. And that is the sole purpose of. So what do you think, even not at this platform, everywhere we have seen, either we are looking for astronomy, either we are looking for geography, for looking for history. Don't you think that we have borrowed this looking of all these aspects in the last 200 years under the colonized mindset? Because if you look at the earlier commentators, they never bothered to look, all these aspects. They knew how to write commentaries on a Mahabharata from its original perspective. Any take on this?
That's a very beautiful question, Ramji. What has happened, I believe, is that this whole scientific temper has been hit so hard on our head all the time that we try to find science in everything. Now think of it. Nobody wants to use this scientific lens to look at any other dharma. Nobody asks, how is a virgin birth possible? Yeah, nobody tries to justify it using science. They just say, hai to hai. Okay. Now, I am not saying that we should do the same. Of course, let's try and find logical lens to fit to it, because somewhere it also helps. Yeah, somewhere it also helps us go back and figure out what is really there and what not. Because as I said, right, lot of stories get added ki aisa hua tha in terms of miracle, which actually didn't happen. Let's take another example of Ramayana. We have the story of Ahalya. Ki Ahalya became a stone, patthar ban gayi, aur Ram ji ke पैर छूते ही वापस स्त्री बन गई. एंड आज की जनरेशन में पीपल विल बी लाइक, अरे पत्थर से स्त्री कैसे बन सकते हैं और स्त्री पत्थर कैसे बन सकती है? आई थिंक दिस इज अ वैलिड क्वेश्चन टू आस्क. एंड द ट्रूथ इज देयर इज नो पत्थर इन रामायण. इट इज जस्ट दैट शी इज लिविंग अलोन इन एन आश्रम, एंड जड़वत शी हैज बिकम लाइक अ स्टोन डज नॉट मीन शी हैज बिकम अ स्टोन. पहली बात. दूसरी बात, वेयर इट कम्स टू नैरेटिव, yeah, people say कि अरे राम जी ने पांव लगाया. अरे नहीं, actually she is a तपस्विनी. So Vishwamitra tells Ram and Lakshman, आप इनके पैर छुओ. She is a तपस्विनी. इतने वर्षों से वो तपस्या कर रही है, and राम लक्ष्मण उनके पैर छूते हैं. ठीक है. So I think while yes, this is a bit of trying to find science into everything is a bit of a colonial hangover. Not a bit, a lot of it, because we are always like logical. में क्या होता है ना? Sometimes we have to understand a concept for the concept or for the learning it's trying to give us, rather than trying to look at it very literally. So in our scientific temper, we actually lose out on the essence of it. That is also true. But the other thing is, it also helps us filter out some of these additions that have happened, which actually make no sense, which actually don't even appeal to us logically कि ऐसा क्यों होना चाहिए. The thing is, they make इतिहास mythological while it's not even there that way. Yeah. So I think it's important, but somewhere we need to use our विवेक बुद्धि and say, okay, कहाँ पर लगाए और कहाँ पर ना लगाए. और क्योंकि सिर्फ एक चीज हमें समझ नहीं आ रही है, so should we just throw that out as ये सारा सिर्फ story और fake है? नहीं, that is also not right. So that's where the whole विवेक बुद्धि aspect comes in, and that is what we need to develop, and that is the stress of Mahabharata as well. When we talk about Dharma Sankat, how do you get beyond it? Through vivek buddhi. Right. And that comes through our shastras, that understanding of our shastras through Veda and Purusha.